final moments on his deathbed. Anne of Austria, the eventual queen consort of France, wasn't actually born in Austria. She was born in Spain and was a Spanish princess. Why would a Spanish princess be named after Austria? Because she belonged to the House of Habsburg, the royal Austrian dynasty. She was also an archduchess, and her royal heritage gave her both her name and unimaginable wealth. As a young girl, Anne was known to be very beautiful, blonde hair, green eyes, and an oval face. She was definitely the picture of European beauty. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also known to be quite the equestrian. Because of her beauty in her youth, she had an abundance of admirers. From birth, Anne of Austria's family expected her to marry someone of their choosing. Their choice, King Louis XIII of France, was purely a political decision. They wanted to ensure a marriage alliance between France and Spain, the two major Catholic nations in Europe. Their relationship would be a pragmatic one, and the marriage was shortly arranged. It was hoped that the couple would love each other eventually. This was not to be the case. Anne of Austria was incredibly young when she married King Louis XIII. The pair were only 14 years old at the time, and their families wanted to get the political alliance settled as soon as possible. Louis was your typical 14-year-old boy and had no idea how to talk to girls. He treated Anne indifferently for their first years together. The fact that Louis had an immense distaste for Spaniards and immediately fired most of Anne's Spanish servants was not a good start to their relationship. Anne of Austria was a stranger in a foreign land, and her husband instantly made her even more isolated. As well, after the pair consummated their marriage on their wedding night, Louis allegedly refused to sleep with Anne for years afterward. He eventually caved, but only because he was forced to. When Anne and Louis both turned 17 years old, the court pressured them to definitively consummate their marriage and produce an heir. It was obvious to anyone with eyes that they didn't love each other. But that didn't change the fact that France needed a baby to ensure there was no possibility of annulling the marriage alliance or not producing an heir. What made things difficult is the fact that Louis often refused to be around his wife. He even went as far as choosing to live separately from Anne for many years. This made it increasingly difficult to conceive an heir to the throne and carry on his royal line. It didn't take long before Louis's attitude and behavior started taking a serious toll on poor Anne of Austria. No matter what Anne did, she could not seem to remedy the distance between herself and her husband. The French always considered her to be the foreign queen, because she surrounded herself only with her Spanish ladies, and waiting and never fully learned the French language. In an effort to improve the young couple's relationship, the king's closest friend and advisor, the Duke of Luynes, came up with a solution. However, his solution was rather cruel. He sent away all of Anne's familiar Spanish ladies. He then replaced them with French ladies instead, and put his own wife in the most influential position. Anne of Austria had been lonely in this new country, and this move made her feel even lonelier. If that wasn't enough, Luynes also made Anne style herself in the French manner. At this point, it seems that the Duke stripped her of her entire Spanish heritage. He forced her to speak French, surrounded her with French ladies, and even made her dress French too. We can only imagine how hard this must have been for the young queen. But despite its difficulty, it may have worked somewhat. Louis and Anne appeared to have developed some affection between them. When Anne fell ill in the spring of 1620, the king allegedly seemed genuinely worried about her. He even grew so distracted that he neglected his duties as king until he knew that Anne had recovered. Although it seemed like Anne and Louis were finally through their rough patch, they weren't. The pressure on Anne and Louis to conceive a child grew with each passing year. But there seemed to be no salvation in sight, and kept getting pregnant, then miscarrying, only doubling the couple's misery. After 16 years, the couple still had no child. People started to whisper that a queen who couldn't produce heirs wasn't of much use at all. In court, Anne opposed the king's powerful and famous advisor, Cardinal Richelieu. The pair got into many fights over his policies, which frequently put France at odds with the Habsburgs. With such a powerful enemy, dark rumors started swirling around Anne. Many came to believe that she was secretly betraying the king. Rumor had it that she was involved with the Comte de Chalais, a noble whom Richelieu had accused of treachery and had beheaded. Cardinal Richelieu decided that he would spy on Anne through one of the highest-ranking ladies in the Queen's household. He had Madeleine du Fargis, a French courtier and agent, become great friends with the Queen, hoping that she would spill Anne's secrets. His plan completely backfired. Madeleine actually came to like the Queen, and they became friends. To get back at the cardinal, Anne tried to plot with the ruthless Queen Dowager Marie de Médicis, Louis's mother, to have Cardinal Richelieu deposed, as they both hated him very much. Unfortunately, they failed miserably, and their actions actually made Louis come to rely on Richelieu even more. Because of this, Anne ended up on her husband's bad side yet again. In retribution, Louis reduced Anne's court and fired many of her ladies, including Madeleine du Fargis. Despite the fact that du Fargis had arrived as a spy, she and Anne became inseparable. When Louis announced he was firing half her court, including du Fargis, Anne was forced to resort to desperate measures. She ran to Cardinal Richelieu himself and begged him to convince Louis to let du Fargis stay. Cardinal Richelieu obviously didn't like that his spy had turned into Anne's best friend. He refused her, and du Fargis was forced to leave. Anne told Richelieu that she'd never forgive him. When France fought Spain in 1635, Anne found herself in a delicate situation. She kept up a secret correspondence with both her brother, the King of Spain, and other French ambassadors. Before the conflict, this wasn't exactly a huge deal, but now she was technically communicating with the enemy. It was only a matter of time before someone in France got suspicious of their Spanish queen. In 1637, Cardinal Richelieu began investigating her under suspicion of participating in secret correspondence. But apparently, years of mistreatment had given her some backbone. This time, Anne was going to fight back the only way she knew how. While Anne's various helpers quickly admitted that they took part in her secret correspondence, Anne simply lied about it. She said she'd never sent any letters to Spain and prayed that they'd just take her word for it. Finally, Anne cracked under the gill of sending her secret letters and admitted that she corresponded with the Spaniards. The king had hated Anne before, but now her standing fell lower than it ever had. After the whole secret letters affair, things deteriorated greatly. From that point on, Louis had every single letter she wrote inspected before it went anywhere. On top of monitoring her letters, Louis placed severe restrictions on where Anne could travel. Anne had done most of her secret correspondence in convents, away from the prying eyes of the court. Even worse, the staff at those convents had acted as messengers, getting the letters in and out of France. This must have been particularly painful for Anne, as those convents were one of the only places she felt truly at home in France. Whenever he thought Anne stepped out of line, as he had done many times, Louis would fire many of her staff. Well, this time was no different. He got rid of anyone he thought might help Anne, and commanded the new staff who were loyal to him to never let her be alone. From this point on, her ladies-in-waiting always stayed with her no matter what. She had no more privacy anymore. After many years of trying for an heir and sadly not succeeding, then entirely ignoring each other for many more years, Anne once again got pregnant. According to rumors, she had bad weather to thank for the child in her womb. King Louis, who almost never stayed with her, ended up spending the night with her during a bitter storm. The couple did their marital duty, and Anne finally became pregnant. She'd been pregnant several times before, and none of the children had lived, but this time was different. Anne birthed her first son and heir to the throne, Louis Fafoutis. In 1638, At the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, she named him Louis Joudonné, or Louis God-given, because she saw him as a miracle. After struggling to conceive for so many years, the nation rejoiced and agreed with the name, considering the boy a divine gift from God. Louis XIV's birth marked a turning point in Anne's life. Anne and her son Louis had an uncommonly affectionate relationship. Unsurprisingly, based on how everyone else in the court treated her, Anne liked to spend almost all her time with young Louis. This maternal influence strongly shaped Louis' interests in food and theater. Anne thought Louis truly was a gift from God, so it's no surprise it went to his head. Young Louis firmly believed he possessed absolute and divine power in his monarchical rule, something he would put to use as France's extravagant son-king. Even though Anne had finally produced an heir for her husband and the French monarchy, there was still a high level of distrust between husband and wife. No matter what, they could not get along, even with an immense amount of pressure lifted from their shoulders. Despite this, Anne and Louis conceived a second baby only 15 months after their first. No one expected this sudden burst in virility, as Anne was already 38 years old at the time. Anne was able to take her children away from the main palace and move away into the Palais Cardinal. Things were finally starting to look up for Anne of Austria, and they were about to get even better. Louis XIII succumbed to tuberculosis in 1643 at just 41 years old. Though he and Anne had spent more time together in his final years, it is doubtful that Anne was very sad about it, considering his decades of mistreatment. The fact that Louis would try to make sure she wouldn't have any power after he died certainly didn't help. One of Louis XIII's final acts was to stick it to his wife. In his will, he tried his best to make sure she never saw an ounce of power, and intended for a cardinal to be regent of France instead of Anne. In reaction, she convinced the Parliament of Paris to revoke Louis's will and install her as regent for her son, now King Louis XIII of France. Louis XII's final effort to backstab his wife had failed. She was now the most powerful person in France. Now that her husband was gone and Anne was in charge, she could finally return to visiting the convents that she loved so much. In 1645, Anne commissioned a new Val-de-Grâce church on the land of a Benedictine convent. This is where Anne regularly went to pray and worship as the regent of France. She had it built to show thanks to the Virgin Mary for her ability to have 2 children after so many childless years. Anne of Austria may have been regent of France, but she knew she wasn't the right person to actually run the country. She entrusted the French government to Cardinal Mazarin, her chief minister and oddly enough a protégé of her arch-nemesis Richelieu. Surprisingly, they worked well together, and he remained loyal to the Queen for years. Perhaps they worked just a little too well together, as citizens believed that Anne and Mazarin had secretly become lovers. The rumors got a whole lot louder during the Front, an aristocratic revolt in France, when pamphlets came accusing them of such. The pamphlets even claimed that the pair had married in secret. Things were becoming rockier for Anne with this new revolt and rumors of an affair. But she was not the same pushover that she once was. This time she would handle things differently. With this new rebellion against the monarchy, Anne as the regent was able to overcome it with Mazarin's support. After many years of acting as the regent of France, Anne's son, Louis XIV, officially came of age in 1651. This meant that Anne no longer held official power over the government. However, Anne and Mazarin maintained a lot of influence over the new and young king and helped him make many of his political decisions. In 1661, Anne lost Cardinal Mazarin. His health had allegedly been in decline ever since a fire at his beloved Gallery of Apollo in the Louvre Palace. The blaze destroyed many priceless works of art, and Mazarin took the loss hard, succumbing to an unknown illness not long after. In his public will, he left all of his money to Louis XIV. He also left Anne a 14-carat diamond called the Rose of England. If Mazarin and Anne really were lovers and married, as rumors said, this must have been terrible for Anne. Mazarin had definitely done a lot more for her than Louis XIII ever had. After this, Anne took a step back from things and was able to enjoy corresponding with her family again. Anne had made a comeback in the eyes of the French people. She had become much more popular and esteemed than when her husband was still the reigning king. After putting up with the worst from her husband, his cronies, and essentially everyone around her, Anne of Austria got the last laugh. She was able to retire to the convent that she loved most, the Val de Grace in Paris, and she lived there up until the very end of her life. Anne, who had clearly lived a long and scandalous life, is an unconventional queen in a region of France eventually lost her life to breast cancer after living in the Val de Grace convent in Paris for 5 years. She was only 65 years old. Anne of Austria's legacy as Queen of France was marked by personal struggles and political triumphs. Her rather unhappy marriage to Louis XIII was often strained and riddled with rumors of scandal, which was reflective of the turbulent court politics of the time. Despite these challenges, and the fact that her late husband tried to betray her, she secured a long-lasting influence on the French monarchy, particularly through her regency for her son, Louis XIV, who would go on to become one of the greatest kings of France and reign for over 7 decades. I hope you enjoyed this video about Anne of Austria, and if you did, please like and subscribe.